To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep, no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep, perchance to dream. There's the rub, for in that sleep of death what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country, from whose bourne no traveler returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have, than fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pitch and moment, with this regard their currents turn awry, and lose the name of action. Soft you now, the fair Ophelia, nymph, in thy orisons be all my sins remembered.
Why do you think Hamlet's soliloquy is probably the most famous speech in the English language? Hamlet's fourth soliloquy is probably the most famous speech in the English language because of its intriguing opening lines and the beautiful language used to discuss Hamlet's philosophical thoughts. The phrase "to be or not to be," found in the first line of the soliloquy, can be seen referenced in many former writings and is quoted by characters in movies.
I read once, passingly, about a man named Shakespeare. I only read about him passingly, but I remember one thing he wrote that kind of moved me. He put it in the mouth of Hamlet, I think it was, who said, "To be or not to be." He was in doubt about something.
It is the line that most associate with Shakespeare's Hamlet. Despite the fact that the saying has a memorable quality to it, it is a serious contemplation of life or death, a topic that can resonate with many of the audience. When Hamlet asks the question, to be or not to be, he is asking himself to exist or not to exist. He is debating the idea of taking his own life. However, the soliloquy is more of Hamlet's reflection on life and suicide, which is suggested with the opening line. There are many things Hamlet lists that makes life burdensome. The whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes. But it is the dread of something unknown after death, he says, that makes it all bearable to live. The contrast and mental struggle, shown so clearly through the elegant diction, seems to accurately represent the human mindset. Shakespeare forms connections with the audience, an example of his emotionally sensitive language. The end is written with a more feminine diction than the rest of the soliloquy, leaving the last syllable unstressed enriches the speech to greater effect, making it more relatable. The gentle plea to Ophelia contrasts with the stronger, harsher images of the bulk of the soliloquy. The wish to be remembered after death is a common theme among many. Hamlet's desire and subsequent request draws the audience into his mindset, allowing them to see clearly his inner turmoil.
Hamlet broaches the subject of self-slaughter yet again in the play, though there seems to be a noticeable contrast in the way Hamlet thinks about suicide. How is Hamlet's contemplation of suicide here different from his contemplation of suicide in Hamlet's first soliloquy in the play? Hamlet's perspective on suicide appears to mature quite a bit between the first and fourth soliloquy. The first soliloquy is vastly different from the fourth in its diction, emotion, and viewpoint. There, Shakespeare utilizes more visceral, angry language that communicates the idea that Hamlet is incredibly emotionally invested in the drama proceeding around him. Lines such as, "Fie on it, oh fie, 'tis an unweeded garden, that grows to seed, things rank and gross in nature possess it merely," are full of imagery that conveys a raw sense of Hamlet's emotions. What he feels isn't cultured or princely. He's devastated and betrayed, and reacts to these emotions by searching for relief through self-violence. The act of suicide itself is portrayed as emotional and ugly, an act that is frowned upon, as in the lines, "Or that everlasting had not fixed his canon 'gainst self-slaughter, O God, O God." Hamlet intensely wishes that he had the religious freedom to take his own life, just as he intensely feels his mother's betrayal at this point in the play. He seems to be overwhelmed by the intensity of his emotion. He's looking desperately at death as an escape from the mental and personal hell that is his current existence. In stark contrast, the fourth soliloquy is reserved and generalized. Hamlet doesn't seem to be talking about himself when he mentions suicide, instead alluding to it with the immortal line, "To be or not to be, that is the question." Throughout the fourth soliloquy, he touches on the few of the same themes as he did in the first one, religious responsibility and the burdens of life, yet he does so with a more mature perspective. Rather than cursing his God for not permitting him to end his own life, Hamlet simply notes that uncertainty about the afterlife is sufficient to make many men pause before death. Hamlet muses that if not for this fear of the unknown, who would fardels bear, or what person would choose to undertake hardship if they knew that paradise awaited? His calm, detached analyzation of suicide almost suggests the perspective of a man with one foot in the grave, of someone who has already come to terms with his own fate, as opposed to the passionate, angry, very much vigorously alive Hamlet from Act 1.
What fardels or burdens does Hamlet suggest men must bear while alive? Given these calamities, what keeps a man from ending his sea of troubles? In lines 78 to 82, Hamlet speaks to the fardels or burdens that a man must face in life. These burdens include the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes. People in a lifetime face a myriad of troubles. They may be wronged by another person, a group, or a government. They may be insulted or belittled. Love could turn sour or pass them by altogether, leaving them alone while their peers find a partner. They could be wronged by the law, either unjustly punished or with their adversary escaping punishment. They may be completely ignored by their government, not control of their own fate. Often, the patient face the worst of these wrongs, as they could tolerate them to the largest degree. No one wants any of these things to happen. Wrongs and burdens such as these are the parts of life that are difficult, that occasionally make the will to keep existing a struggle. Hamlet suggests that if it were not for uncertainty about the afterlife, men would simply end their lives to escape day-to-day life. However, this route from hardship has been blocked by religious responsibility. According to Hamlet's religion, ending one's own life prematurely is considered a sin and grounds for being denied a Christian burial. Suicide could result in being sentenced to eternal punishment, a fate worse than simply bearing what hardship life brings. The uncertainty of the fate of one's immortal soul is, in many cases, enough to outweigh the desire to escape the troubles of life. How is line 83, "Thus conscience make coward of us all," in many ways representative of Hamlet's character throughout the play? Explain. Other than the first line, "Thus conscience make coward of us all," is another important line in all of Shakespeare's Hamlet, and it is arguably in many ways representative of Hamlet's character. The fourth soliloquy is not merely about contemplating suicide, but rather about Hamlet pondering his existence. Life contains many burdens, and according to Shakespeare, only the unknown quality of the afterlife prevents people from seeking a premature end to wearying life. It is the conscience that barricades the body from committing such act. In many ways of the play, the portrayal of Hamlet suggests that he is led by his conscience, rather than his goal of revenge on Claudius. He often second-guesses himself, and when opportunity presents itself, Hamlet delays on it because of his overthinking. The most famous scene where Hamlet can be seen paralyzed by his thoughts is when he finally catches Claudius isolated after the play within the play. However, because Claudius was praying, Hamlet decides against using this perfect opportunity to enact his father's revenge on Claudius. Hamlet, being over-analytical, does not go through with the act because he believes that Claudius will end up in heaven if he is murdered while praying. What Hamlet did not take into effect was that Claudius never repented for his sin, so it does not necessarily mean he can automatically get to heaven if he is murdered while praying. Hamlet, though perhaps brave and willing to act, is overcome by his tendency to question everything and disposition for melancholy and lapses into inaction, therefore seeming cowardly.
Why do Hamlet's thoughts turn towards Ophelia at the soliloquy's end? Throughout Soliloquy 4, Hamlet is questioning his life and the meaning of existence. Wearied by his internal conflict, he feels that the burdens of life are heavy compared to the responsibilities keeping him tied to earth. During a time of sadness or melancholy, it is common for a person to think about the people that they hold dear. Ophelia was the object of Hamlet's affection. It is natural that as he contemplates death, he thinks on the attachments tying him to life. His romance with Ophelia is likely one of those connections that he does not want to lose. There is debate as to whether Hamlet still loves Ophelia. Even if he has gone mad and no longer feels an attraction, the connection developed prior to the play still carries meaning. If she, as a woman, reminds a sensitive Hamlet too strongly of his incestuous mother to continue to hold any spark of romantic interest, his thoughts could still have been pulled her way. Hamlet has reached an Elizabethan melancholic state due to the perceived betrayal of his mother. 2. In the words of A.C. Bradley, a soul of a youthful poet who feels both the beautiful and the disgusting to the extreme, a repulsive act will taint all associated with it. The overarching idea of a woman has, in Hamlet's mind, become associated with his mother's repulsive act. As he slips further and further towards the act of suicide, it is natural for him to think about the hardships and wrongs that have driven him to his lowest point, and those wrongs culminate into a woman. Shakespeare could also have had artistic reason to have Hamlet contemplate Ophelia in this specific soliloquy. In lines 97 and 98, Hamlet says, "The fair Ophelia, nymph in thy orisons, be all my sins remembered." He's asking Ophelia to hold him in her memory and to pray for his soul. This statement is richly ironic considering that Ophelia meets her untimely end prior to Hamlet. Shakespeare's placement of Hamlet's thought of Ophelia in a soliloquy devoted to suicide could also function as foreshadowing for the apparent suicide of Ophelia later in the play. This again creates irony, as provided that Hamlet is partially tied to his life by his attraction to Ophelia, it is interesting that she chooses to end hers.